Thank you very much, Carolyn. That was terrific. And it sets the stage. I'd like to now introduce our four panelists. They'll be speaking in order in the program. And our first panelist that will be speaking is Kwende Kefentse. Okay. He is actually our municipal representative. He's a cultural planner with cultural development and initiatives at the City of Ottawa. We then will have Mohammed Brihmi, and he is the coordinator de Réseau du Noth. And he will be talking about Francophone networks. We also will have Livianna Tossutti, and Livianna is the associate professor with the Department of Political Science at Brock University, and she in fact will be talking about political and civic engagement. And then I'd like to welcome Michelle Cundari, who is a health promotion coordinator with the North Bay District Health Unit, and she will be talking to us about a Newcomer program in a pilot. So I'm going to let each of the presenters come up and do their 5 minutes presenters. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for having me here. This is actually my first time in North Bay, first time in the North, really, actually. I grew up in the GTA myself. I moved to Ottawa actually a little bit later, so this catches me right in the middle of some of the things that we're discussing, because my parents were immigrants. They immigrated here in the 60s from Barbados, and I then, after being born here, had to went and chose another city to live in, and so again, in some ways, I'm sort of in between some of the things that we're talking about, new Canadians coming, and then also how does talent, assuming that I'm talented, decide where it wants to go after the fact, and so yeah, I grew up, like I said, I grew up in the GTA, had a great love for music and a great love for books, and that sort of brought me to Carleton University. I ended up in the College of the Humanities there. I was studying an interdisciplinary degree, which took me through, I guess, the history of what we term Western civilization. And then I did a bit of architecture and geography after that. And I wasn't sure I was going to stay in Ottawa, but I actually got ensnared by some of my other activities. Like I said, I may not have mentioned it, but I'm a DJ. I have like a radio show, and like I rock a bunch of different parties around the city, and that was the stuff that actually ended up keeping me in Ottawa after my education was done. Actually, I was ready to go, but then I was doing my radio show, and I said I was going to stay, and then I started writing for the newspaper, the Ottawa Express, and that kept me there a little bit longer, and then again some of the parties that I were doing just sort of kept me there. And so it's interesting because it was cultural activity at the grassroots level that ended up actually retaining me in Ottawa. And then through some of that stuff, I ended up actually connecting with the scholar Richard Florida when I was working when I was doing interviews for the newspaper. We ended up connecting and working together and doing work about the way that culture functions in cities, and also about music, the entertainment economy, and I was writing a little bit with Richard, and then it was through all of that I ended up getting a job at City Hall. And so now I work at the City Hall in cultural services, and my job as a cultural planner has to do with helping the city set strategic plans for the next 20 years as it relates to arts and heritage. So when we talk about culture, we're usually talking about arts and heritage. In Ottawa, there's what's called an Ottawa 2020 plan. It's a 20-year strategic vision. It comes in 4 parts, actually 5 parts. One of them is environment. 2 is economic development. 3 is human services, so that covers the social side. And then 4 is culture, which is arts and heritage. And we consider that should be a 4-pillar approach to sustainability. And so doing the culture plan renewal has had us implicated in every element of arts and heritage as it relates to the city, sort of developing, again, strategic visions a series of different foci. And so for me, I'm focusing on culture and youth, and I'm focusing on culture and the creative economy. And as we're developing the plan, we're really sort of looking at the different ways in which culture can implicate itself in a series of different streams to increase the sustainability of the city. And we talk about sustainability, we really do have a strong focus on talent retention. Through that, and when we do creative economy and youth through culture, it interfaces us quite a bit with economic development. And that's one movement that we have, one thing that we've been trying to do in a greater way is interface culture and economic development, because we recognize that once you have your economic pieces in place, rather when there are jobs and a diversity of economic input in the city, and opportunities for people, it's after that that you really have to start thinking about how you're going to utilize culture to keep people in place. Because particularly when it comes to new Canadians, jobs will bring somebody to a place, but they won't necessarily. But it's everything around that job that enables them to stay there. For example, at least with my parents' generation, it was the ability to participate in Canadian culture as a Caribbean person. Because of their community and because of some of the investment that the City of Toronto made into making that community welcome, that enabled them to feel like that was a place where they could go. And when we were continuing, as we continue on to do the cultural plan renewal, we're using the equity and diversity lens that Caroline mentioned to develop how we approach the various discussion papers and interviews that we conducted to start setting the plan in place. Hopefully, it'll get tabled to council in December of 2011. I'm trying to think about what else I could mention here. Like other than the fact that when we think about culture in this four-pillar structure, we really consider it a starburst, as something that really reaches out and connects and brings together the other three pillars into concert with each other, because it's really the ability for people to input their added value into society through culture, and to have that multiplied through connection with economic development that we see as our ability to gain future wins. So I'll just leave it there.
My name is Mohammed Brihmi, and I am le coordonnateur des réseaux de soutien à l'immigration francophone dans le nord de l'Ontario, qui fait partie du contact interculturel francophone de Sudbury, dont j'ai le plaisir de vous annoncer la présence de deux de mes collègues, Meron Yoshua, directrice générale, et Sibyl Niambe, agent d'établissement, ainsi que d'autres collègues de la région du contact et de la région de Sudbury. Tout d'abord, lorsqu'on m'a demandé de parler de l'engagement civique, j'avais en tête un autre sujet que je voulais aborder, mais qui implique aussi l'engagement civique, à savoir comment le réseau de soutien à l'immigration et les partenaires locaux en immigration, les LIPS, peuvent engager les communautés à travers leur propre structure. Mais pour parler de ça, il faut que j'ai divisé ma présentation en trois parties. Je vais parler un petit peu du contexte de la mise sur pied de ces deux structures, des opportunités que ça crée ces deux structures. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. I'm going to divide my presentation in three parts. When they asked me to make the presentation about civic engagement, I thought of using this opportunity to talk about the two tools that deals with immigration and that have the mandate to work with the local community, to engage the community either in civic or cultural or sport activities, as well as other activities. In order to do so, I'm going to divide my presentation in three parts. I will put into context the two structures, I mean the réseau and the LIPS, and also the opportunities that exist through these two mechanisms and the challenges that we face through them. As you might know, Canada has benefited through its past from immigration, but the Francophone community didn't benefit as much as the English community from immigration. That's why Francophone minority communities, as well as the federal government, developed a strategic plan. And I'm here, I mean, Jerry didn't say that, but Jerry is one of the co-chairs of the steering committees that involve people from CIC as well as other ministries and the Francophone community across the country. And the objective of the steering committee is to ensure that federal ministries comply to Article 41 and 42 in ensuring the promotion of linguistic minorities, Francophone outside of Quebec and Anglophone in Quebec. And that's why the réseaux were created to this mechanism, and it gives them protection, it gives them a strength, and that's why when we established the three réseaux in Ontario, starting from 2006, and the Réseau du Nord was created in 2007, and it is hosted by a community organization, and which is the contact, to ensure that the Réseau, I mean, has a mandate which is community-oriented, but linguistically also driven, which means the Réseau is for the Francophone community. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't work and collaborate with other communities, but our mandate is to increase the number of Francophone immigrants to the Francophone local communities that has, I mean, in the north, I mean, all the communities, because of the Asian population and, I mean, the exodus of the younger generation. All of these communities has known a lot, I mean, a decrease in their number. And I can tell you, for the first time in the last 50 or 60 years of the Francophone community in Ontario, it has known an increase in its number, and it was due to Francophone immigration. The LIPS, on the other hand, they are driven in a collaborative approach that came under the Canada-Ontario Immigration Agreement of 2005, and it was driven by municipalities. And some of you might know, municipalities are not subject to linguistic legislation, as well as Francophone communities. Francophone communities in those municipalities in Ontario have, through history, I mean, the other second important element, that French Language Services Act of 68 doesn't apply to municipalities, which make it a challenge for Francophone to be taken, I mean, to work under or to work with the LIPS. That's why we have, as a result, to ensure that whenever there is a need of the Francophone communities that come out through the LIPS, we have to ensure to take that into consideration, and we deal with that, and we bring it to the Francophone community to ensure that the needs of the communities are taken care by Francophone, and that are sensitive to the issues of Francophone. I know that the evolution of services to municipalities regarding the LIPS, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, it has its strength, it has its positive aspect, but the evolution also sometimes might come out, I mean, without taking into consideration specific needs of local communities, and also how those communities could get, involved or into the services that could come out from this devolution. In terms of advantages of collaboration between the LIPS and the réseau, I see, both of us, we could help local communities to engage them and to have access to different services. I take into consideration, I could give an example. For instance, we could engage local communities, réseau and the LIP to ensure that municipalities in the north, provide daycare services to Francophone communities. We could ensure, for instance, we were in Sault Ste. Marie in the middle of February, and what the community over there is trying to have one structure that hosts 3 schools, as well as a health center, as well as the local, the community cultural center. And our role is to work with the, with the LIP and with the municipality to ensure that those needs of the communities are taken into consideration, are taken into consideration, and that the local, the municipalities help the community into achieving that type of goal. Those are small examples. Another example, for instance, I talked with some of my colleagues, Scott, John, Danny, and Michelle, and LG, regarding hosting. All of us, a regional forum that could deal with local immigration, with the issue of immigration in Northern Ontario, that could be bilingual, and it took into consideration of the specific of the whole Northern Ontario. And this forum, for instance, has to respect. I'm not going to deal with these guys if I don't know that the Francophone community would have full access, full participation in this forum, and that the communities will be a full partner in that type of forum. And this could benefit all of us. It could give us a strong voice, and it could help us maybe to develop a strategy that take into consideration the, the issue of immigration in its different aspect for Northern Ontario. We could work together, to develop and promote a strategy that could help us. Okay, the last thing, the challenges. Few of the challenges, just quickly. There are constitutional challenges in regard to, the works of the LIPS and the réseau. I know that the réseau, they have some protection, and with the devolution of the LIPS, that's another aspect. The LIPS work and serves under municipalities. We work and serve under community organization. We are community oriented. And sometimes we might have issues with that. I have excellent working relationship with my colleagues of the LIPS, but I put myself in the shoe of my colleague in the South who has to work with 13 LIPS in Toronto. How to ensure, a working relationship in that type of situation. Even though we are interested in a very close working relationship, what we want to ensure that, the needs of the Francophone communities are protected. We want to ensure that we are taken seriously and we are respected as a partner, in this relationship. I'm sorry, I welcome your question, but this is, as I said to Caroline, this is an introduction to a presentation I have to make in Vancouver to Metropolis. If you have any question, please help me to improve.
Yes, I'll be talking about political and civic engagement, and I'd first like to give you an outline of what I'd like to address. First, I'd like to define what it means, to tell you why it's important for communities, and secondly, also to talk about some research that we know in terms of the participation and civic engagement of newcomers and members of visible minority communities, and a brief overview of some best practices from different municipalities across Canada that have tried to take initiatives in this particular subject area. So by political and civic engagement, I'm referring to representation on municipal councils, but also to voting in local elections. That's the political participation aspect that I'll be looking at. In terms of civic engagement, I'll be looking at volunteering activities, philanthropic activities, and also participation in voluntary organizations. Civic engagement is a component of social capital, which refers to networks, relationships of trust between individuals, but also participation in groups. And social capital is known to have very positive outcomes for communities. Research has shown that communities with high levels of social capital, that is thriving levels of civic engagement, also are healthier, they have lower levels of crime, better educated, and they're more prosperous. And there's some research that shows that it's not the economic development that leads to social capital, it's the other way around. It's the communities that start with good levels of social capital that eventually become prosperous. So there are some really compelling reasons for taking this seriously. In terms of the extent to which newcomers and visible minorities are represented in our local community councils, I have to say the news on that is not very good. They tend to be underrepresented, that is, members of visible minorities tend to be underrepresented in municipal councils, both in first and second and third tier communities, so there's a challenge there. There's also a challenge in terms of voting levels. Yes, the turnout in local elections across Canada is pretty abysmal, 30 to 40%, 20% in some communities, but immigrants and native-born Canadians participate at the same visibly low rates. So obviously there's some work to do there. In terms of voting in federal elections, immigrants who are newcomers still are voting at lower rates than native-born Canadians, even though they possess the same attributes in terms of education and income and other factors that would lead them to vote. So we're still seeing a participation deficit in terms of newcomers vis-a-vis native-born Canadians, and this isn't going away. There are some newcomers that have been here 10 years who have the right to vote who are not voting. And it's not just about they're lacking the finances to do so or the education to do so. There's something else at work here. In terms of philanthropy, the news is much better. Immigrants give at the same rates as native-born Canadians and actually on average give more money than native-born Canadians. So another good reason to include immigrants in our philanthropic outreach activities. But in terms of voluntary participation in voluntary organizations, immigrants still do participate at rates that are lower than native-born Canadians, and they're particularly absent in the sports and recreation organizations and in social service organizations, so there's some work to do there. Having expressed all of this data to you, most of my data, I have to say, are taken at the national level. There are some local level data, but there's clearly a more need to do more locally sensitive research. We have lots of data for Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. We need more at the small and mid-sized community levels, so much more to be done there. Okay, in terms of certain groups that I think need special attention, Canadian-born blacks vote at lower rates than other visible minority groups, and people of Chinese origin who are foreign-born also vote at lower rates. So there are some issues there and challenges there that I think all communities have to be sensitive to, but there are also some interesting responses to those issues that are being formulated at the provincial level and municipal level across Canada. Okay, moving on to some best practices to try to improve civic engagement and political engagement. I will only talk about practices that I think can be modified or are useful for smaller mid-sized communities. Why? A, because they don't require a lot of financial resources, and B, they make use of existing talents. And I'll give you some examples from I've come across in my own research. Firstly, I've done research in Edmonton, and they're doing some very interesting things there in terms of encouraging people from newcomer communities, particularly from the African communities, to come out and have a say in local policy development. And what they've realized is that showing up at the traditional town hall meeting or the traditional public meeting at City Hall is not something that a lot of newcomers feel comfortable in doing. So they've hired an organization called Multicultural Brokers to actually go into the homes of newcomers, put on a pot of coffee, and talk about policy. Cheap, right? Cheap and easy and very popular to do. And I think that's something that small and mid-sized communities could do if they're really serious about getting newcomers to have a say in local policy development. Just going to them, not expecting them to show up in the evening for a meeting at City Hall, which they don't do. Another interesting thing both Edmonton and Vancouver are doing is doing outreach to newcomer groups, not established immigrant groups, but newcomer groups who perhaps aren't so skilled or knowledgeable about filling out grant application forms. They come from countries where you don't submit grant application forms to public authorities. They need help and training and guidance on how to do it, and they actually meet with them face-to-face and say, this is how you do it, and they give them feedback on the forms, and it works, and they're happy with it. I've spoken with the different organizations, maybe Latin American or African, and they give marks to the cities. They say, they're trying, we recognize this, and we appreciate that they think that our voice is important. So I think that's something that any community could do, regardless of the size. Edmonton is also, I think, I consider it a leader in terms of the size of Edmonton and what it's trying to do. It has also set up a community partnerships grant program, unique in Canada. Maybe Toronto has something similar. I shouldn't say that's not unique. Toronto and Edmonton do a lot of things similarly with each other. Edmonton has set up this grant program in which it is, again, trying to make things easier for the newest arrival groups, not more established immigrant groups, the newest arrival groups, to apply for funding for shared public space. So that they can get the groups together and talk with each other, and instead of convening with each other, work with each other in shared public space that's surplus school space, for instance, that isn't going to be used. They're about to shut down the school. Why shut down the school? Just renovate and give that space up to the community. Again, it's cheap, right? And you've got the resources to do it. You've got people in the community to do the necessary renovations, and why get rid of the space when other groups might need it? Also Toronto, I know that there's some hesitancy in talking about Toronto examples, but again, there are some things they're doing that again could be modified to be useful for smaller and mid-sized communities. They have a regional champions program, which is partnering up young women with female counselors to get them involved in politics. Again, something that doesn't cost money, it just requires time and willpower to get more women involved in politics, and women from diverse communities. The Maitri Foundation also very active on this front with its School for Civics program, which provides training to anyone who's interested in running for public office, primarily from disadvantaged communities or diverse communities, and to tell them how you go about doing it. Elections BC has come up with some interesting suggestions on how to get more young people and young people from diverse communities interested and active in electoral politics. For instance, they've noticed, for instance, when interviewing members of the Chinese community, that members of the Chinese community in Vancouver didn't feel right about voting because they thought, they just had some misunderstandings about the whole process and were fearful of it. So they decided that perhaps we need to reach out to younger Chinese in the communities and get them involved in the process at an early age. So what they did was they started recruiting multicultural students from high school to serve as volunteer interpreters and staff at Elections BC polling stations. So I'm thinking we have an upcoming provincial election. Perhaps the province could consider recruiting volunteer staff from diverse high schools, all high schools for that matter, because young people aren't getting involved in politics, to just serve as volunteers on election day and exposing how exciting elections can be. And that's something we can do in the subsequent municipal election too. There are many other examples of things going on in Canada. I can talk about them in the Q&A if you like. One final point is I think that cities are doing a wonderful job in terms of trying to improve economic initiatives for attraction and retention, but I'm generally sort of disappointed to see the very low levels of initiatives on the political and civic front. It just doesn't have as high a profile as it should, and I think it needs to be given more primacy. Yes, having a job is important, but if you don't have a voice when it comes to establishing municipal policy, and if you don't have a voice when it comes to deciding who governs you, then having a job may not be as enduring as you think when that job disappears. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you to the panel.
So good afternoon, everyone. Just have some slides up here for you to review as I quickly go through my 5 minutes, and if I'm getting you to focus your attention on this way we won't see LJ giving me the 5 minutes is over kind of deal. So my job here in North Bay, I work in public health, and I'm a community health promoter with a family and school team, and my focus is on physical activity. So I'm here to share or boast about what we're doing in our community and the partners that we're engaging in terms of promoting physical activity for our community members, and more specifically today on the newcomer girls and women in our community. This is supposed to go over like this. Maybe not? There we go. Other way. So the group that I'm involved with is called CAUSE, and Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport and Physical Activity. And this group encourages girls and young women to get off the bleachers and onto the fields and playing courts, into the pools, the locker rooms, and boardrooms of Canada. The specific project that I'm here to speak about is the On the Move project, which is a national initiative designed to increase opportunities for inactive girls and young women ages 9 to 18 to participate in sport and physical activity. So the stats, the facts, in terms of the females that we're talking about, they prefer activities that maximize participation and dislike competition. We go back to the social participation that Carolyn had mentioned earlier as well. The stats that are there, only 8% of the girls meet the recommendations in Canada's physical activity guides compared to 14% of the boys. So because of some of these stats, because of the preferences of females, this Newcomer On the Move project came to be. Well, the On the Move project came to be, and then the Newcomer project came from that. So the Newcomer project, just a little bit of a background. It was funded through the Ontario Ministry of Health Promotion and Sport, through their Healthy Communities Fund, provincial, 2009 to 2011. The development of the program was for newcomer girls and young women in 4 communities. You see the diversity alone in the cities that they chose for the pilot projects. Ottawa, 2 sites, North Bay, Brampton, and Hamilton. The goal is to increase the capacity at the community and provincial levels to address disparities in availability and the use of the sport and recreation programs for newcomer girls and women. The objectives behind this program and what we're looking to share when it's all done is to learn about the barriers to newcomer girls and young women and the programs that they may want to participate in, to develop and implement a healthy living program for newcomer girls and young women in each of the health regions. And then finally, which is the part that I like the most, is to disseminate the project findings to other communities across the province so they're able to utilize that information in their own communities. So in each community, an advisory committee was formed with various partners. Each community had an on-the-move workshop. I know in our community there were probably about 30 participants that came to the workshop, heard a little bit more about the trials and tribulations of girls and young women participating in sport, brainstormed some of the barriers that we could possibly foresee in our programs, and from there an advisory committee was formed, and 2 8-week healthy living programs have been running in our community. So CAUSE was able to contribute, obviously, financially to these projects. We're also able to contribute expertise, support, communications, and evaluations. Why newcomer girls? Just some stats here. The third bullet is the one that kind of rings the most in my head, but minority girls and women are the most underrepresented in the Canadian sport and recreation system. In terms of barriers, these are evident to me and evident to the participants that were at the workshop. Systematic challenges and social challenges in terms of planning a program for newcomer girls. And the work that CAUSE has done, their first step, their first manual that they produced was an on-the-move program merely for young women and girls. Went a little further, did an on-the-move project for Aboriginal girls, and now the newcomer girls. The majority, and it's a very loose statement the way I'm saying this, the majority of the barriers are very similar. A girl is a girl, a woman is a woman. but at the same time, in terms of programming that we're doing for newcomer girls and young women, obviously there are some other challenges that we've come across in our programming, and I will share that a little in another minute or so. The project that we chose to do here in North Bay, a Girls on the Move program, you'll see, you know, the characters of the girls and in the bubbles having fun, healthy eating, feeling good, and active living. The partners listed at the bottom, again, the work that I do and the work that many of us do in the communities, I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. So the partnerships that we've had with Big Brothers Big Sisters of North Bay and District, the City of North Bay Recreation Department, the Health Unit in Neora, which is recreation in Northeastern Ontario, has been critical. Such activities, just to share, I do have an overview of the project. There's information on the CAUSE website as well, and I'm more than happy to share a little bit more information about the program if this is something you're looking to bring into your community. We have, in the 8-week programs for the girls, it started off, and the concept of On the Move is learn from the girls participating in the program. So it starts off the first week, what would you girls, like to do in the programs that we're going to be running for you. So it was hearing from the girls, we'd like to try Zumba, we'd like to try Tai Chi, we'd like to do self-defense, we'd like to go ice fishing, we'd like to go skating. So being able to provide those opportunities for the girls has been obviously great for us, being able to showcase Northern Ontario and North Bay for those newcomers to our city. Some of the key components of why our program worked, and I know when we did our first 8-week program, we did sit down and evaluate. We heard from the girls, what did you like, what did you not like about the program, and us as advisory committee members and leaders in the program, what worked and what didn't work. And we actually had seriously considered not doing the second 8-week program just because we were concerned about numbers. But when it all comes down to it in North Bay, and I know LJ and I had a quick conversation before, we did really well considering the newcomer population and that target age in our communities. So because of the partnerships we had, the program leader that we had hired had already been doing some work with the City of North Bay, so she had all that leader training that they had given her in the program. Access to public health, that's resources for presentations on healthy eating, access to brochures and what's happening in communities. Informal discussions, that's where the girls were able to sit down with the program leaders who were close in age, which is you see as a bullet a little farther down. Combining the education with the physical activity and sport, so it wasn't just girls show up to the program and we're going to do a Zumba class and then we're going to send you on your way. It was discussions, maybe in the cab on the way over there. The girls were, matched up every week with different girls and different leaders. So you can have that discussion in the cab on the way over to the class, discussion on the way back to the Big Sister's office, and then sit down and have a snack together. So it seems like a very, very simple concept, but at the same time, it's something that worked in the community and worked with the group. The last one, just to mention, was the providing the transportation, which I know in many of the programs that I work in, transportation is the biggest barrier that we hear about on a regular basis. So the fact that we were able to put dollars in the budget to provide transportation was a key element in our program. Challenges kind of mentioned, recruiting, and that's where we needed to go out and do the personal invitations for the girls because, a poster that's circulated through the newspaper or on the radio or through the schools, many times, the girls are looking at that and saying, I'm not interested. So it was the personal invitations where our program leaders actually went into the schools, spoke to the newcomer girls, told them about what the programs were like and, asked them to come. Shyness challenge, icebreakers discussions, providing information, engaging the parents, again, that was something that was key. I know I'm a mother of a young daughter, and if I didn't have that information about the program and the background and maybe that meet and greet at the beginning, I might be a little leery about sending my daughter to a program. Finally was the organizational support, and that's the success stories. So us as a group being able to share that information. So just a quick testimonial, and this was from one of the girls. They felt that at school they might consider playing something because they tried it through the Newcomer on the Move program. So just a great, I mean, it's again a little success, but at the same time, you know, if I can get, or we can get these girls a little more physically active in their programs at school or in their homes or in their communities, to me that's a plus for sure. So Opportunities Cause has applied for some more funding to deliver these programs in Alberta and Nova Scotia. Jumpstart, again, community partnerships in the community, a new Canadian swimming program. And then I just had the other in case, you know, something came to me as I was listening to the other presenters or conversations that come up. So thank you for that. Sorry to kind of throw it at everyone, but I do have an overview with some more information and willing to answer more questions.